In this last video, just going back into the painting again, using more paint this time and some glaze and filling in the spots that I missed the first few passes. So the triangle area between the three squashes, I'm going back in with a blue and a black, and I am painting that in and then going into the shadow. The shadow on underneath the pumpkin has a little bit of red orange into it, making a brown with the black. So I'm adding that in. So you can see I'm mixing it on my palette. I'm not using a ton of paint either. It's really not a big area, so I don't need a lot of paint. And I have a medium mixed already into my paint. Making sure that it keeps dark right underneath the object where the object sits on the table. And making sure it blends in and keeping that white tablecloth in between. So I'm making that neutral brown color. In the front of that squash is another shadow that got washed away. So the shadow in the front of the squash is lighter than the one behind it and has a little bit more of a yellow into it. So I mixed a little orange into like a neutral brown, and it's lighter, so I added a little white. And then as it comes around the form, it actually becomes darker and colder in terms of color. So a little bit of blue added to it and black. And right behind the squash, it actually gets very dark blue, really. Below the pumpkin, I'm doing a bit more of a neutral brown. You know, brown is red, yellow, black. If you want it cooler, you add a little blue. So these are just going back into things that we already did the first time and really touching them up. Using a small brush. You know, if you have a medium brush, it's not as small. You know, make sure you're just using the tip of the brush, being really delicate with it. So I'm going back into the stem on top of the pumpkin, and I'm making a black, a dark black green. If I add a little red into it, I neutralize the green without making it brown. I just want to show a little bit more detail than I originally put, so I'm just glazing in a little bit of color. I'll add a little highlight as well, making sure the right stays dark. Maybe a few little areas definition within the stem. And I'm adding the yellow on the left side into the green so that the greens continues to reflect that it has light coming onto it. But it will give it a little bit more interest and dimension than what's there. And I already have a pretty standard mid-tone. I'm adding a little white into it for a highlight. Now we have our lights below, so we would have a little bit of highlight on the top as well. And I'm really just being real soft about it. Next, I'm making a new highlight on the pumpkin. We did a lot of good lighting effects on it in the second pass. This is just the final highlight, which is the lightest light. So it's not white, it's yellow. It's yellow with a little bit of red, a very, very light orange, close to white though. even though it is a highlight, it's not going to be white because the object itself is orange. Unless it was something like a ceramic, you know, jar or something where it would really reflect the light in terms of color just being the white of a highlight. On this object, it still reflects as yellowish. And I'm not adding it everywhere. I'm just adding it to a few spots because I already have a gradation of color. So that should feel like a highlight, a little bit of shine on it. And I'm going and I'm adding a little bit of a highlight on top of the squash, just using kind of yellow on top. Make it a little brighter. And basically the last layer is about cleaning up any edges, you know, going back into things that maybe just need a second touch, or third touch in this case. So I'll go back into the tablecloth and some of the shadows. So this I'm just adding like a white and a blue, and I lost a little bit of the edge with the pumpkin. A little bit of my background came in, so I want to clean that up. You know, all these marks that I may have left, they were not part of my intention, and those are unintended marks, which, you know, are a craftsmanship issue. Because every mark that you put on your canvas should be intentional. So I'll clean up that area on the right too. And, you know, I have a few white spots, so I'm just going back over these shadows and the table. Again, just making sure that my craftsmanship is at a good level. Especially when you spend so much time on a painting, it makes no sense not to just clean up the area that you maybe didn't go over enough. You spend so much time on painting the object when your viewer is going to look at, you know, those white spots instead of, you know, all the time that you spent on making something look beautiful. So I'm going back over the shadow in the back. I'm just using the blue and the black. And if I go too light, I can go back over it again. I'm using very thin layers of paint and a medium brush. And I'm not repainting the entire thing. I'm using a glaze so I can modify things without having to repaint. Making sure that I go over all those white spots and solidify any edges that need attention. So like right here, I'm adding a little bit of black into it so that it feels solid. And as it comes out, it diffuses. And when you're working with the glaze, it's easy to shift things around like this. And it does good for coverage. If you miss a spot, it's easy to glaze over it and get rid of those white spots. So I'm just using the white to clean up the area, you know, any of those marks that I may have left. And for each person who paints, you know, you may have something that you left unattended that you'll have to deal with. This is just where I didn't give as much attention to. And you can see there's a hierarchy of attention. I'm giving more attention to the objects than I am to like the tablecloth and the background. But I still need to be attentive to the foreground and the background. So I'm adding a little bit of a shadow underneath. I'm just using like a gray, like a blue gray. You see in the photo, there's a little bit of a shadow there of where the tablecloth, or where the cloth sits against the tablecloth. And I'll just put a little highlight back in here.